Hello and welcome to Cinemaholics Happy Hour, where we sit down for a one-on-one conversation with a friend of the show to talk about just one topic that's on our minds. As always, I am Jon Negroni, host of the Cinemaholics main show, new episodes every Sunday. And with me, I have one of the co-founders of PixarPost.com and the Pixar Post podcast, T.J. Wolsos. T.J., how are you doing this week? I'm so excited that you're here on Cinemaholics for the first time. And, first, let's get the introductions out of the way, but I have a big question. We'll get to it.
Okay, fantastic. So, yeah, I'm doing great. I appreciate the invite to come on and chat, because anytime I can talk about Pixar, being the Pixar experts that we are, I'll go ahead and throw that stamp out there.
That's right. It's true.
You know, we love the opportunity to chat about it, so we're doing great. We got some exciting sneak peeks, if you will, as part of the Wreck-It Ralph trailer and a couple other things that have been out there. We've got some Bob Iger news that was talking. So there's been lots of good news coming and getting excited for all the upcoming Pixar films.
Yeah, I love referencing Pixar Post on my own blog. Whenever I'm doing like a Pixar thing, you guys are usually one of my favorite sources. And I was thinking about who to have this conversation with. Our episode is Pixar in Decline. And, TJ, I'll say it, like we met at the Inside Out event a few years ago. Yep. And when I was considering this, I was like, you know what? Who are the most who are the smartest, most well-rounded Pixar fans I know? And it was a tough competition. There are a lot of ones I love and respect. If you're listening right now, I apologize.
No, but yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. TJ, you and Julie, I'm a huge fan. I love your podcast. I love your takes on Pixar. And so I feel very honored to have you on.
Well, I really appreciate that, especially because, yes, there are some other fantastic Pixar sites out there who we're also friends with as well. I think one of the key differentiators for us is just because of the balance of it's run by me and my wife, Julie. So we have a good balance of the male-female perspective. We bounce back and forth on different things for different ideas. Our passion for it has grown out of many, many years of animation and Pixar fandom. So it's one of those things that we don't take lightly, even though it started as just this fun project for us.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate it very much.
Yeah, it's like 6 or 7 years now, right?
Yeah, so we started in March of 2012. So we've, our passion for it was much before that, but that's when we formalized it in the website and said, what should we do? We want to do something more about this.
That's fascinating. March of 2012, because in April of 2012, I started jonnegroni.com. And that's when I started getting the ball rolling on my own blog. So it's kind of interesting how we had
it must have been something in the air.
Something like that. Yeah, I was in Virginia at the time, much closer to where you are right now. But
yeah.
Okay, on to the main thing here. First I want to ask you, because we don't have any Pixar movies coming out anytime soon. The whole topic of this episode is Pixar in Decline. And one of the cool things about that is it's not just us talking about this. We reached out and we have a lot of other Pixar fans that we mentioned earlier or alluded to earlier who are going to weigh in on this. But before we get to the Pixar stuff, the next Disney animation film, of course, is Ralph Breaks the Internet, Wreck-It Ralph 2. And, by the time you're listening to this trailer will have been out for a while, but we just got this one. This is the second official trailer. It's kind of like the third teaser trailer for Wreck-It Ralph 2. And TJ, I wrote about it a little bit this week, and I saw that you mentioned on Pixar Post, you guys pointed out the Buzz Lightyear cameo, but I want to get your take. Where are you at this point?
Oh, we absolutely love Wreck-It Ralph. As far as the franchise, we're excited for the continuation of it. I like the idea of the fact that it's of course, like most sequels, it now has to go outside of the original place. So now they're leaving the arcade and they're going out into the internet, which is just a treasure trove of jokes and everything else that can come with it. I would say that of the Disney animation of the newer generation of films, this is the one that we're most irritated was not just made by Pixar because of how much we love it.
Right. They are similar. I mentioned in my write-up that the friendship between Vanellope and Ralph, it reminds me a lot of like Buzz and Woody, like the platonic best friends.
Absolutely.
Like we're getting a lot of that with like Moana and Maui and Nick and Judy, and it makes sense. Like it's not every movie has to be like a romantic sort of central dynamic between the characters.
Yeah, absolutely. And, between the cameos, I think there is definitely some folks that are confused as far as, why are they kind of crossing these two things over? But it's because, we don't take any, we're not saying like, oh, don't combine the Disney and Pixar franchises together, because they're in the internet now. There's all these different places that they are. So we're not saying, that they're encroaching on Pixar's territory or vice versa. It's just going to be a fun movie, and we can't wait to see it. Gal Gadot being in it seems like she's going to be an interesting character that's going to throw in some extra spice to the film.
Yeah.
And, we're just excited for it. I can't get enough of Wreck-It Ralph. We watched that actually quite a bit, and our son is a big fan too.
That's awesome. I adore the first Wreck-It Ralph. I think we were ranking our favorite computer animated Disney films, like post Bolt and Meet the Robinsons. Yep. And I picked Wreck-It Ralph as my favorite as of it was like right before Zootopia came out. So it wouldn't, I don't know if it would beat Zootopia and Moana for me. Those two were like movies that are really up there with Wreck-It Ralph. But yeah, that one really took me by surprise back in, I guess it was 2012 or 2011, one of those years. And,
2012, because it was up against Brave for the Oscar, and that was the upset. And I remember there was a lot of people mad that Brave won that over Wreck-It Ralph. But it took me by surprise too, because it was the first one that felt not princessy, not as youthful. It was more of a definite where it steps into that Pixar territory, like we were talking about, and just the overall, the creativity of it, the visual aspect of it. The part that kind of sold me right at the beginning is when they're going through the whole setup for the movie and they're describing the games. It was also at the beginning of that whole 8-bit craze, where the artwork was in that style. And then just the creativity of traveling through the power cords and the surge protectors kind of being central station was just, I immediately, right in the very intro, I was all over this movie.
I think that is what elevated it for me at the time, was the world building. If we have to compare it to Brave, the other animated film, the Pixar film that came out that year, I was just a little bit more in love with how the continuity worked, with the rules and kind of the main thrust of the story. I know a lot of people complain about the whole like Sugar Rush environment being a big focus of the movie, but for some reason that always really worked for me because it was so crucial to the Vanellope character and I cared about her. So by result, I cared about that area, I guess. But we could talk about Wreck-It Ralph all day. Not what we're here to discuss in full, but it is a conversation that we'll definitely be revisiting once Wreck-It Ralph 2 comes out and see how that does, especially with Rich Moore directing it once again.
Exactly.
Now, with the main topic here, TJ, I brought you on to talk about something kind of heavy, and that's kind of the state of Pixar at this point. I was asked on Quora a few months ago here's the actual question. In your opinion, is the quality of Pixar movies declining? And this is a tough question to answer because a lot has happened in the last year with Pixar from an organizational standpoint, from kind of just a consensus, like the narrative around Pixar. I went on YouTube and I was like, okay, I wonder what the YouTubers are saying about this. I kind of talked to them like they're a monolith or something, but you know what I mean? Like, I just wanted to see, okay, what are the video essays? And there are a handful of prominent, Disney, Pixar bloggers and influencers who have done entire videos, like long ones too, about like, there's my problem with Pixar, is Pixar failing? Stuff like that. And, I couldn't find one that I was like, oh, that one's really good. Like, there wasn't one that I was like, oh, I got to bring this up on the show specifically, because a lot of them I was kind of just disagreeing with the entire time. Not that I am saying an answer to this question is a different way from what they're saying. So I'll start with you, TJ. How would you simply answer this question? It doesn't have to be one word, but how would you put it?
Well, I don't want to discount anybody's feelings on it, because Pixar is definitely different today than it was in 95 or 2005 or whatever you want to, whatever era, whatever date you want to look at. It's definitely a different company. So is it declining? I guess that's all depending on how you look at it. We can talk, and I have, different things that as you presented this idea to me, I was writing down different ideas and running through different things in my mind, and bouncing some ideas off of Julie as well. I don't think it's a decline. I think it's an evolution. And I think, as everything out there, I don't know many things that are on top forever. Apple Computer, big in the 80s, tanked in the in the 90s, and then ended up coming back again. I mean, if you look at music trends, if you look at sports teams, as people within the organization change, so does the business. And so as much as people want things to stay the same, they also get sick of them if they stay the same. So the organization has to change. It's a living and breathing thing that is out to make money. And as they bring in new people, I view it as an evolution. But as we talk, I'm also interested to talk about from the financial standpoint and show how that compares as well. So I think I'll leave it there for right now. We'll end up covering some of the other things as we continue to talk. But on the surface, so that way I don't go too deep yet, I feel it's more of an evolution. What do they learn from that evolution? And I feel that there's a pretty good baseline for where we're going to go in the future with Pixar.
And before we kind of get to all of that, the financial stuff, the sequel stuff, one of the main reasons I really wanted to talk to you, TJ, is because I feel like you have a really good appreciation for the people there at Pixar, the people who work there. On your podcast, like, you interview people who work on these films, and I think that can be a good read of that evolution you're talking about. I mean, is that fair to say? Like, do you think the workplace culture at Pixar is either declining, or maybe it's getting better, or maybe it's just a little bit different? And what's your take on that?
Okay, so the culture, if you want to go that way, as far as some of the employees and the culture. So the employees, I believe, have always had the same passion throughout this whole thing. The culture definitely went through some dips and dives. And again, I know we're going to touch on Jon Lasseter, so we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But what I wanted to do as far as initially thinking about the culture is talk about, if a company is in decline, would they be doing these types of things? So they continue to celebrate International Women's Day. They put features on all of their Blu-rays, DVDs, 4K about the paths to Pixar, and they do different features about the women and then about different artists that have come in and out. They've always been a big supporter of the It Gets Better campaign for gay rights. They support the pride parades that are out in California. They launched recently, which I feel like this is a more recent evolution, is The Palette, which is a storytelling session that they have. So it's a new studio resource group that talks about learning about diversity and inclusion at the studio. And if I have any input on it, I feel like from a diversity and inclusion standpoint, yes, diversity when the studio started was a lot lower. The people that were, and I've defended this for a very long time, the people that were in the beginnings of computer animation, as far as if you look at the picture from that very first class at Cal Arts in room A113, it's a very heavily male group.
White,
so
for sure.
100%. So I feel like the beginnings of the company were also going to be mirroring that same thing. Over time, as more people have gone into Cal Arts and other art schools and graduated and come out of that, the diversity has increased. Where I feel like Pixar needed to pick up a little bit was on the inclusion standpoint. So the definition of diversity and inclusion that I've heard this is not my definition, is that diversity gives everybody a seat at the table, but inclusion makes sure that everybody has a voice at that table. And I think that from the diversity standpoint, it started off less diverse, it became more diverse. Now we're seeing the next phase, which is the inclusion phase. And that's where you're starting to see more of the female voice, more of the culture side of things between some of the short films of Sanjay's Super Team with more of the, and Domi Shi with Bao, getting some of that Asian American flair in there. She's also working on a feature film. So there's other things that are happening that I feel like are continuing to support that culture. And then they just do fun things too, like Pixar Palooza, and which is their music festival they do every 2 years, and Motorama, where it's a car show that they do every 2 years. Every one of their events that they do supports all families too. So your families are all invited and those types of things. So I think from a culture standpoint, it's going to be even stronger moving forward. They definitely had hiccups over time. And it was exacerbated for sure with the John Lasseter issues that arose that definitely set them back. And especially also, I'll say, with the Ed Catmull wage freezing issues that came up there for a while, too. So he was involved with that. So there were definitely cultural blasts. But I do feel like they've taken the steps to prove that they're interested in making this better for people.
Yeah, I mean, we're both Pixar optimists, I would argue. And I think that's what you're referring to with the Lasseter thing. You know, we don't have to go into too much detail yet, but, you know, just to sum it up for people, you know, what happened, of course, we don't know a lot of the details, but Lasseter was put on suspension. He's going to be out permanently, I think, by the end of this year. I think they're still relying on him a little bit for Toy Story 4 consulting. But, you know, aside from all of that, we don't know specifics, but there were sexual harassment allegations. Something happened related to, you know, issues with gender dynamics going on. And one, you know, fair thing to bring up is that, you know, it wasn't just Lasseter. Some people, there was Cassandra Smolczyk, who came out and was like, it wasn't just Lasseter. It was kind of, because Lasseter got away with this, you know, there was kind of a boys club mentality. She wasn't able to, you know, progress at the company. And, you know, we can kind of look to Domi Shi, who was elevated by Pete Docter, one of those programs, I forget the name of it, but the one where they allow you to pitch, you know, your own original ideas. And you know, that's kind of what got her that, you know, chance to have the feature film that she's reportedly working on.
Exactly.
I think that, it's complicated. Right? Like if anybody was going to tell me like Pixar is completely evil or something like that, I'd say, no, I mean, there are problems. There are places where they really need to improve in terms of that workplace culture, but they are making the effort. I think, you know, another side to this isn't just the, you know, the workplace culture and people feeling, you know, being in safe spaces and being able to avoid like toxic, you know, abuse from male employees. There's also, you know, this idea that Disney and Pixar are kind of at war with each other almost. Disney Animation, to be more specific. And
sure.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up all that stuff about the specific Pixar related things that they're doing, because they are different. You know, we were kind of talking about how Wreck-It Ralph kind of reminds us of, you know, Pixar, you know, qualities. I think a lot of people would say it about Zootopia. There's a reason why whenever I talk about Pixar movies, people are like, oh, well, my favorite Pixar movie is, you know, Meet the Robinsons. And then that's a problem. You know what I mean? It's just, the absolutely. Lines are as blurred as ever. And I kind of feel it. I kind of feel it sometimes of like, you know, now that Pete Docter is in control of Pixar and Jennifer Lee, you know, Frozen director, she is the head of the animation for Disney. Do you still see that division there? Not even a division. That probably sounds more negative.
Sure.
Do you see that, like that line, that real like separation?
So I think that's actually one of the things that I'm most excited about, is the separation between Pete Docter running one studio and Jennifer Lee on Disney's side. Because I think that with Jon, and if you want to talk about some of the beginnings of some of these other things, I think Jon just was too stretched on some of the projects. So let's forget about the culture for a second,
right,
and talk about the films. And I think that, you know, Jon was too stretched. He was putting his time and attention into Disney Animation Studios and the revival of that. It's probably a more interesting project at that point, because he felt Pixar was a self-sustaining entity that was just going to continue to roll forward at the pace it was at. What's the point of, you know, why would you assume anything else? And Disney became this project that he could take over, change, and evolve, and you know, put another amazing stamp on his name as far as to say, I did this as well. But I also feel like, yes, the lines got blurred. And if you want to talk about us being optimists, I definitely am. But there was one thing that I always questioned and said I don't think it should have ever been done, which was the movie Planes being made out of Disney Studios, but in the Cars universe.
Disney
Toon Studios. Yes, exactly. But that one always bothered me. I thought, you know, of course, nobody's going to make every decision right. And I don't want to question his decisions. They're his decisions. I just didn't prefer it as much.
Then they made a sequel. I mean, then it's like, okay.
Yeah. So, but I think in general, I feel like I like the division, because although they are still going to share some services together in terms of I wouldn't expect that the brain trust is going to split back out. They do have individual brain trust sessions, which are, again, just a level set for anybody that might not know. It's like their most senior creative people that get together and discuss and break down the films in the different stages. And they say, what should we be doing differently? And they spitball ideas back and forth. And right now they have individual ones, and then they also have group ones where they can help each other across studios. So I think that will continue to remain, but I love the idea of just two people that are going to be bringing two unique visions, running those studios, because I do like a little bit more of a difference in flavor between the two, because I feel like they can be different, and I don't want them to be the same, because I don't want everything to be the same. I want each studio to have its own brand and identity and feeling behind them to get people more energized about one studio over the other, and then have a fun, friendly competition among the same parent company.
So let's talk about the quality of the films in their own context. We've kind of discussed, okay, what's the state of the company, and there's a lot more we could get to. But real quick, I do want to talk about the movies themselves, and a lot of the complaints toward the Pixar films of the 2010s compared to the early 2000s is that, sure, we've got Inside Out, we've got Coco. You have people like me who love The Good Dinosaur, but, we're unicorns, basically.
Yes, yeah.
So those are the three original Pixar films post-Brave. And, I'll actually just reference, this is how I answered the question on Quora. I answered this in March of this year. Okay. And the question, as I'll repeat, was, is the quality of Pixar movies declining? And my response was without question. I think that Toy Story 3 marks the end of Pixar's Do No Wrong run. I think they had a golden streak. I think that every film up until Toy Story 3 had been above average or excellent. I count A Bug's Life, I count Cars as the above average films. And then everything else, I would say, is at least excellent. And then if I look, though, at the 2011 and on, which starts with Cars 2, I think you have fewer excellent films, a few more above average films, and a handful of average films, and then one outright bad film, which is Cars 2. And so that's why, to me, it's like, well, that is a difference of decline, literally. And I think that's where the narrative sort of comes from. It's like, okay, you have two excellent films. You have Inside Out and Coco. I think most people will agree on that. I think people will at least give The Good Dinosaur above average. I personally love it. I think it's a great film, but again, not everyone agrees with that. And then I think Cars 3, Finding Dory, Incredibles 2, this is just my opinion. I think all of those are above average. I want to hear from you, though. Do you think I'm maybe off on this? Do you think that those films, any of those films, are either average or, and whatever rating system you want to use, really?
Sure. As far as overall, tackling your first part of it, as far as post Toy Story 3, that is 100% accurate. And I think that that's the right way to look at it. I think a lot of people look at it as, they get stuck in this thing of what is making Pixar different now than it was before. And on the surface, unless you know more about the studio, you start to say it's all about the sequels. And people are like, well, there's all these sequels now. And so definitely, if you look at their first 10 films, they only had, and I break it up as 10 and 10, not by the years so much, strictly because they're at film 20 now with Incredibles 2 is their 20th.
I respect that, keeping it clean.
So the first 10 only had one sequel. So 10% of the film's sequels. The second 10 had 6 sequels. So that's Toy Story 3, Cars 2, Monsters University, Finding Dory, Cars 3, Incredibles 2. Right. So I feel like some of the blame gets placed there. Now, where I think it goes and where I think that you start to notice the difference more is on the style that you're looking at it from, and you kind of answered about, which is the quality of the films, which is the basis of, they always say story is king. So I feel like it's the basis of the story, because I don't think anybody argues that the animation quality, the effects, the lighting, everything that comes along with a Pixar film is not stellar on all these.
Absolutely, yeah.
So it is the story that is the basis of these. And this is where I think if you read some of, the books that are out there, like Creativity Inc. that Ed Catmull wrote, he starts to point out that, maybe they didn't do so good of a job as far as transitioning folks from the original guard of, all these original films by John Lasseter, Andrew Stanton, Pete Docter. Right. I mean, they were the heavy original creators. And then you even got Lee Unkrich in there.
And Brad Bird, can't leave him out.
And Brad Bird, of course. You've got all these heavy hitters. But then as soon as you hit the era that you're talking about is when you start to notice the change. So John Lasseter did Cars 2, but it originally was not his film either. He came in to try to save it much the same way that he came in and tried to save Toy Story 2 and succeeded there, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But in this...
Could be the best Toy Story film to a lot of people.
It is not only my favorite Toy Story film, it is my favorite Pixar film.
Oh, good to know.
So Cars 2... John Lasseter is behind that. He was a big base for it. But I think this was the first one that shocked people. This is different than anything I've ever felt coming out of Pixar. And this is also the time frame that after the Disney sale in 2006, that these movies that were already created prior to the Disney sale, Ratatouille, WALL-E, Up, these were ideas that were around prior to that sale.
Right.
And Toy Story 3, in fact. So Cars 2 is now post-Disney sale. Things are different.
We should say real quick that sale was 2006, I want to say, either 2006 or 2007. Like when all that went down. So like you're saying, those movies were already in development. Ratatouille, Up, WALL-E, and then like you're saying, Cars 2, boom.
Right. So I feel like there's a little bit of that's in there. The other thing is now you're trying to hand off the reins of writing and directing to other folks. So you've got Brave with Mark Andrews and Brenda Chapman. Now, Brenda Chapman was originally the creator, the writer, and they brought Mark Andrews in after. That started the whole beginnings of the male female dynamic. Brenda Chapman was definitely, and states that she's a proud feminist. She was not happy that a male came over and took over her film.
Right.
She feels like she should have been in charge of it from the get-go. But you're starting to see writing and director changes. So Monsters University, Dan Scanlon, Inside Out, Pete Docter. Look at that. It's back to where people think it's a great film. Good Dinosaur, Peter Sohn came in and replaced Bob Peterson on that, which Bob Peterson's one of the original Pixarians as well, because that story was struggling. Finding Dory was Andrew Stanton. The last time he's had an original was 2008 with WALL-E. And as much as people might not love that, the box office screamed they loved it. It did over $1 billion. Cars 3 was with Brian Fee as the director. Coco, again, another one that people feel is so great, was Lee Unkrich, also Toy Story 3 director and way back editor from A Bug's Life and everything like that. So you're and Incredibles 2, obviously with Brad Bird and over $1 billion still going, came out in Italy, I think today or yesterday.
It could actually do it. It could be the highest grossing animated film of all time. I think it's getting closer and closer to Frozen every day.
It absolutely is. But where I was going with all this the long way,
it's a great breakdown.
is that Ed Catmull noted that maybe they didn't do the best succession plan between the original guard and the secondary guard. So it's not about sequels, in my opinion. It's about the story and the people that are writing these. I think that the people that got put into these positions either didn't have the same magic or collaboration or whatever it might be. Now, I don't want to say that I dislike any of these people. For anybody that knows me and Julie, they know how much we absolutely love Dan Scanlon's writing style, his comedy, and his direction on Monsters University. We both love that film.
I did a recent post of which Pixar plot twist is the best. And yeah. I almost went with the Monsters University twist. I think that it's genuinely inspired. I went with Ratatouille instead, but still.
Oh, Ratatouille. Masterpiece in my mind. So I think it really comes down to story, and maybe these folks just weren't. And I don't want to put them down. So don't take it that way, anybody listening. I don't want to make it seem like I don't respect these people. Peter Sohn is a genius at what he does. And I talked with Mark Andrews about his upcoming film the last time I was at the studio with him. And I just think that there's so much there, but it just felt different to people. And John Lasseter was busy taking his feelings to Disney potentially a little. Right. And I think they got more of the Pixar vibe there for a while because he was kind of like the brainchild behind that original 10 or so films of Pixar. And
to an extent, it's debatable. It's a little debatable how much influence creatively Jon Lasseter has had over the years. I think some people will argue that Lasseter, he started out as an animator. Maybe sometimes people give him maybe a little bit too much credit. We don't know 100% for sure. It doesn't have to be one or the other. So I'll just put that out there.
Well, yeah, I'll tell you why I kind of think that there is a lot of credit that's deserved there, actually. Because in the interviews that we've done with Pixar folks, unprompted by us, a lot of times when we're asking questions about specifics that we like or that really stood out to us, the person we're talking to, again, totally unprompted, goes, "Oh, so amazing that you guys brought that up. That was actually Jon Lasseter's doing."
Yeah.
And again, he
gets credited all the time.
Yeah, I mean, we hear it again and again from employees that are working on the projects that when they're in the room with him, they're like, he said I should do that. And he does sprinkle in a lot of input into the direction that some of these films should go. And he gets credit for it because I think a lot of it he does do. Yes, I think it's over credited, but I think he does still have a stamp on many of those films that are out there and worthy, because of the amount that we've heard it straight from the director's mouths.
Right. And I think you have to, especially with the first Toy Story, I think he was a big reason the negotiations between Pixar and Disney worked out the way they did. He was he was part of the brain trust. And, I've heard him talk about it. I've heard Stanton and Doctor talk about how they sold the movie, and they all credit Lasseter as kind of the person who pushed Toy Story in the direction that they wanted it to be. That said, one thing I do want to say, because a lot of people will hear everything we're saying and say, well, you know what? Yeah. I still blame the sequels, and a lot of people blame the Disney sale for this. That Disney stepped right in and was like, you got to make sequels, you got to make sequels. And I've always found this incredibly disingenuous, because I firmly believe two things. One, if Disney had not bought Pixar, Pixar would not exist anymore. They would not have been able to afford, at least they wouldn't exist in the same form they are in now. They wouldn't have been able to afford being an independent studio moving forward. They had a lot of money problems that decade. That huge creative output came at a huge cost. The other thing is they would have done sequels anyway, because that is just the cold reality that they had to create sequels in order to keep generating their creative output in more original films. And that's kind of what we're seeing. The pendulum hopefully will go in another direction. We're supposed to be getting 4 or 5 new original films starting in, I think, 2020, right? So,
correct.
And then going through 2022. And so I don't know. I don't really buy this idea that like evil, mean Disney, stepped right in and like forced these creative beret wearing animators to create sequels. Like, no, listen to what some of Andrew Sand's interviews, listen to what they really think about this. And they'll tell you, oh yeah, we were going to do sequels. Kind of, some of them I think have even admitted like they were planning on doing it for quite a while.
Right. But they wanted to do another original film in between those.
Right. They did kind of go back and forth on that of like, oh, we'll do an original here, and then we'll do a sequel here, and then so forth. And then that kind of, got a little messed up because Good Dinosaur was pushed, and then Newt was canceled, and then it didn't quite work out that way. So bottom line, I guess is what we're saying is like, sure, the quality declined a little bit, but I really buy what you're saying in the sense that, it does have a lot to do with the story here. And do you kind of feel like the best Pixar sequels, first of all, which ones do you consider the best ones? Obviously Toy Story 2, but then what would come next for you?
Oh boy. So I guess I would probably say Toy Story 3 would probably be the next. Incredibles 2, Monsters University. It would be the way that I might put them. And then from there, if I had to go further, I'd say Finding Dory, Cars 3, Cars 2.
Interesting. I think I like Finding Dory maybe a little bit more than you, and maybe Incredibles 2 a little bit less.
Okay.
But, I go back and forth. I really love Incredibles 2, but there are things about that plot that just don't work for me at all. That's a conversation for another day. It's still like one of my favorite movies of the year. I'm just being, negative for the sake of it, I guess.
No, I understand. And I'll say that Incredibles 2, I'll tell you exactly why I love it. It's easy.
Yes.
Screenslaver's monologue. I absolutely am obsessed with.
I love the monologue on its own, but I just don't like that it doesn't fit with the other threads of that movie. It just feels like it doesn't belong to me. But maybe I'm misreading it.
Oh, well, I mean, everybody's got, of course, their own take on it. Sure. I loved it. I loved the fight sequence with him. That whole thing, how dark it was. That was a different move for Pixar.
Yeah.
I also love the fight sequence between Jack and the raccoon.
I was going to say, easily, my favorite scenes involve Jack all the way.
100%. And yeah, and I think that's super cool too, that was actually originally in the first movie, was supposed to be there, but they didn't have the technology to make it happen. So they had to bump it to the second film. So I mean, if you know Teddy Newton and his style, he directed the short film Day and Night, in case anybody just wants to even just have to have a quick point reference for it. But he was integral in the first Incredibles. So the fact that scene came back in, as soon as I saw it, I'm like, this feels different. And now once I found out that it was his scene, I'm like, that explains why.
I'm blanking on this, but do you remember which Pixar film Day and Night was attached to?
Toy Story 3.
Remember. Thank you. I was like, I know I saw this in a very specific theater, and I was like, there were 3 Pixar films. I was like, I was not Ratatouille, because I remember that was Luna perfectly. Okay. All that said, so okay, I think we're kind of on the same page here. Real quick, I do want to talk about the new Pixar films that are coming out that get me personally excited. The reason I think Pixar right now, again, it's like a pendulum. I think they're kind of in a little bit of a slump, but it's not a bad slump. There are still good to great movies coming out from them. It's just different. Like you said, it's not the golden streak. I personally don't think the golden streak, again, like you said, could have maintained, a run through the 2010s. Pixar would have gone out of business. They would have gone bankrupt.
The thing that's amazing though, is just the reason why I think people feel the way they do, and why I think people like us have this passion for Pixar, is because that run of success was absolutely unheard of.
Exactly.
I mean, it's just from 95 to 2010. I mean, that is an insane era that really they were able to maintain. And so I think that created this mystique. So as soon as anything felt different, like I said with Cars 2, it went in with this, like, people were bringing their kids there, and then all of a sudden now the car is saying kill him, and there's all these other things that are being said in there that they're like, whoa, this is different. I feel like it just jarred people so much that as soon as things didn't then continue back on as if this was like one speed bump in the road, it all of a sudden said, hey, wait a minute, what's going on here? So yeah, there's a definite difference in the overall feel of them. I'm actually interested to get your take on the differences, because I also look at the differences in the music. And Randy Newman doing the music for the first, I can't recall, several films, 4 or 5 films, it actually feels different when Randy Newman does a film now. How do you think the music plays in with the difference of the films?
I actually think one of the things that has improved to an extent has been the music, honestly. I look at Michael Giacchino's score in Inside Out. I hold it right up there with Up. I look at, oh my goodness, you did a whole episode about this, but the music for Bao, the short film, I listen to it all the time. It's so good. Toby Chu's work was incredible. What people, I think, miss about that short is that the music is so layered and detailed, and the more you learn about it, the more that you get so much out of what he was trying to do there. It really is inspired. I love the music for The Good Dinosaur. I love the music for, I think what they did with Incredibles too was subtle. Because I listen to the end credits all the time on my own rotation. But if you listen to some of the changes that they did for the sequel, it's really good. It really does capture the spirit of the first one, but it adds just a little bit more. So, and I think I love Randy Newman's work with the original Toy Story films. I love that one with the Flix machine in Bug's Life. Yep. It's a really fun and bombastic. Monsters Inc. obviously has such a great score, but I do think that that is one thing that it's not that they are better necessarily. I just think the whole musical compositional side of Pixar just continues to naturally get better with every film, if that makes any sense. So that's kind of where I'm at the moment. And I would say, before we move on, the whole thing with the sequels too, people forget, I've done a few lists where I've actually looked at the box office successes of each Pixar film, and I've adjusted for inflation, and try to keep it in mind of like, you know, how many markets were open, how many theaters and screens these films premiered on, the international and all that stuff. And if you really look at the domestic box office, a lot of the Pixar films that were coming out during this golden run between 95 and 2010
were never as high.
They really weren't. I think like the big outliers are Finding Nemo and Toy Story 3. Those two films were extremely successful.
Right.
But even like Incredibles, which is about its sequel, is about to be the biggest film of all time, it didn't quite land with audiences in the way that we're seeing with Incredibles 2. And so I don't see... I see the business side of it, I guess. I see looking at these films, putting out the sequels and understanding, okay, Toy Story 2 and Toy Story 3 were such huge successes. We got to make Finding Dory. We have to make Monsters University. We have to do this and this and this. And I understand it. I get why they made the decision they did. I think there was just a little bit of a lag in execution, but I am looking forward to the next big run. And I think it could be setting a precedent for Pixar films that are original, like Inside Out. Inside Out is an original film. Coco 2, both of those did gangbusters at the box office because of that mystique you're talking about. It's like, this is going to be one of the great Pixar films. And the strategy, especially with Coco, the way that they tied that into the release in Mexico is really what pushed that film to being such a runaway success overseas. So I sort of see a lot of optimism in that. Real quick, let's break down the next few Pixar films. We know some things about a few of these. I know you're the expert, so I feel like you know way more than I do about a bunch of these. So I from what I can gather, we've got 5 projects that are basically confirmed. A few are more like set in stone than others. We've got one coming March of 2020, and then another one for June of that same year, but I'm thinking that's kind of like, I don't know, is that right? Like, could they be pushing that? And then not another one until the next June of 2021, and then March of 2022, and then June of 2022 again. First of all, what do you make of these release dates? Because I find them nebulous at best.
It's very interesting. This would be the first time that a Pixar movie for the March of 2020 would come out in March. It's always been June or November.
That's like the Disney slate, right? Like that's when Zootopia came out. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it would be the first time there. In June, frankly, so where we're kind of slotting these is because the only thing that we know about that's coming up is obviously, as you already mentioned, Toy Story 4, and that's next June. So less than a year away, yes.
June's the sweet spot, man. The Pixar loves June and November.
Exactly. And then this March one, we have to assume, because we don't know anything else, that it's Dan Scanlon's movie, which is about the suburban fantasy world.
Right.
So what do you know about that?
Well, Corey Ray is producing.
Absolutely.
And it's supposed to be a post-magical world where there are humans living alongside elves, sprites, unicorns, or like rodents. That's like one of the jokes. There's supposed to be trolls in this. And it's about 2 elf brothers who are trying to use, like, basically magic has gone out of this world apparently, and they're trying to find the little magic that's left so that they can reconnect with their dead dad, which to me is like, okay, that's how I'm going to be spending my summers, like bawling over elves trying to, it's going to be fun.
This definitely has the ability to be super emotional. And I don't know when Dan Scanlon pitched this. I don't know how at the D23 2017 festival, I don't know how he didn't break down a little bit. This is his life story of how his own father passed away at a young age. And he had never heard his father's voice until he stumbled across this tape that had his dad's voice on it. And he said he just had this like rush come over him of like, holy cow, this is my dad's voice. This is the only link I have to him. So how can I find out more? And that kind of spurred him to want to look for more. And that's kind of the basis of this movie. We can't say too much else about it, but I can tell you that animation's underway, and the working title I can't say, but it sounds fantastic. There is a patent that was filed, or a trademark, I should say, in Europe first, and then now in the U.S., that the movie is apparently called Outward. I'm not even just being coy about it. I don't know, but I presume it has to be the March 2020 release, which would go along with the next one that we know anything about and that I know that animation's underway for. So I have to assume that it's that movie, and it would probably be called Outward based on those trademarks.
I did hear a rumor that production hasn't started yet, even though animation is underway. I think production is supposed to be coming in January of next year, but that seems really tight, right? I mean, I know sometimes the production can be like a year because they've already figured everything else. Like they figured out the lighting, they figured out all the art direction and everything like that. And this would just be, okay, now we're getting the voice actors in and we're actually like putting some like finishing touches. Do you think there's any credence to that, or do you think we just don't have that information?
We just don't have it. We just don't have it. But I mean, you're right as far as timelines that it would feel tight, but they've done them in tighter timelines.
Yeah, they have. And we should mention too that as far as Pixar films and like original ideas go, this is kind of like where it's getting rarer for them to announce their original ideas so far in advance, which is why this one is like 3 years out, as opposed to like, I think we knew about Coco for quite a while and we knew about Inside Out probably about the same amount of time, because they keep having this problem with like, Newt and Rio and Book of Life and Coco and Ants and A Bug's Life. You want to go all the way back to the beginning.
Yeah. So actually, if you want to talk about some of that, we talked about and touched on it, some of the Disney influence, I actually think the announcing of projects so early is the Disney influence. I don't think they're telling them what to do, but I think they're saying our investors are hungry to know what's coming next. And they kind of did the same thing with the Star Wars thing, where now they pulled back and Iger has said, I was getting a little too eager with talking about it. The quicker you announce it, the more you're kind of committed to having to do these things versus just be agile and say, okay, that doesn't work. The public will never know about it. Kind of like we didn't really know anything about Lee Unkrage's movie about dogs in New York, which of course paired up with Secret Life of Pets.
Right. Which was my Toy Story light, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, same type of theming there too. There was many posts that were done about that. But yeah, I mean, like there's all these movies that were underway that we don't know anything about, and I feel like having to like put your cards out there so early, I feel like if anything that was the Disney influence, because Disney loves to have a deep slate to talk about, and then they run into it where they have to cancel these movies and then explain it, like Giant, the one about Jack and the Beanstalk, that they ended up shelving for Disney and things like that. So I think that there's some influence there, but this definitely going back to the current films that are out.
You meant Gigantic, right?
Yeah. Did I say Giant?
Yeah. I was like,
yeah.
Oh, like the Iron Jet. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Maybe that's what I was thinking. I got Pixar on the brain and Brad Bird, right?
That's right.
So going back to some of those releases, so far we haven't heard anything saying any of these dates are pushed, and at this point we probably would have or could have heard something. So I'd be excited for two films so close together, but it would be...
I guess it's confusing because they would be doing that, like after seeing what happened with Inside Out and Good Dinosaur, I was like, do you really want to go down that road again? Like, because you could look at that as like, well, it's not the fault of having two ones so close to each other. I would argue maybe it is. I mean, look at Solo and The Last Jedi, if you want to bring Star Wars into it. It just feels like when you have like a big Pixar film or a big Star Wars film, like an event film, and that's what these have become. When you put them so close together, you almost kind of lose the hype and the momentum. Maybe.
Well, so I among cinemaphiles, I think that is the case. But I think the general public, when I talk to people out there, they still are confused as who's Disney, who's Pixar, who's Blue Sky.
That's a good point.
To them, it's kind of like animation, and any excuse they can to take their kids to the theater. Most adults are like, okay, great. Let's just go there for it. So I think a lot of the general audience, and again, I'm not in that camp that says that animated films are only for children. But I think that's obviously the bread and butter of a lot of the audience. And I think they don't really care as much as people that are in the know care.
Yeah, that's a great point. And also, it did basically work for Cars 3 and Coco. So, just to be fair.
Yeah, and I think some of the Star Wars thing is because that's the same like franchise. Mm-hmm. Like that's still in the same universe, if you will. These are independent universes, so I don't know if I put that on there.
Yeah, it would sort of be like, we have an Incredibles movie here, and then now we have a prequel for Edna Mode coming out this summer.
Yeah, I feel like that might be like that would be more of that fatigue and like saying what it is. But even with Solo and everything, honestly, if the story was there, if the mystique was there and people were really interested, and it wouldn't have mattered. I mean, they would have been like, yes, let's plow more money into it and go to the box office. But the reviews weren't there, so people didn't show up.
Yeah, good point.
At least my thought.
Well, we'll review Solo in just a second. But first, no. So you already mentioned, Mark Andrews is going to be working on one. Brian Fee is working on a new film for Pixar. I think both are supposed to be originals. Also Pete Docter. And then we mentioned Domi Shi. Do you know anything about these films? I haven't found anything conclusive or anything that I trust the information out of.
So no, they are extremely tight-lipped on these. And any of the even things that we've heard don't give any ideas as far as what the films are or how they're going to progress or what time slots these people would fill into. There was a fun joke out there that a fake Pete Docter account appeared on Twitter and said his film was going to be the 2021 release.
That was a fun moment.
Yeah, exactly. That turned out to be obviously complete garbage.
Didn't Brad Bird retweet him at one point?
Oh gosh, yes, Brad Bird did, and he's like, look who joined Twitter. Meanwhile, he's already on Twitter, but. And then everybody else, Dan Scanlon, other folks were just like, this is definitely not Pete Docter on here. Yeah. So we don't know who's slotted to which, but we kind of know who's slotted in there in general. I mean, you never know if like Brian Fee's project would get moved off. Maybe that evolves into something else. Maybe Domi Shi's doesn't evolve the way it is, because hers was literally kind of just flung out there, but there has been no news on that either. So all we know is that it's a March 2020, a June 2020, a June 2021, a March 2022, and a June 2022.
There you go.
But yeah, it's intriguing, and it's great though to hear, because when I bumped into Mark Andrews at the studio, I said, listen, I'm not going to try to get you to get anything out of. I'm not trying to have you tell me anything. But what we're excited for your next film. And he's like, oh, it's coming along, but it's there.
Well, so if anyone from Pixar is listening, the voicemail tip line for Pixar Post is on pixarpost.com. drop TJ and Julie a line. I'm sure they'd love to hear from you.
Yes, any anonymous information is always welcomed. But we are definitely, I'll also say, we are not leakers in the sense that we're going to throw this information out there. I mean, like I already mentioned, I may know a tiny bit more, and I'm not even trying to sound cool, a tiny bit more about the suburban fantasy world movie Dan Scanlon's. But I mean, we're not going to say anything unless it's something that's out there. Like I was even like, should we even talk about this trademark one of the word onward? But I'm like, hey, they filed a trademark. That's not on me.
Is it onward or outward?
Onward. Do I keep messing this up?
You said outward, and I was like, that's interesting, because I hadn't heard that before. I hadn't heard about the trademark news. So that's onward.
Yeah.
It sounds good.
Yeah, I like the name. It sticks with that Pixar theme of one word.
One word movie. Yeah, that's all you need, honestly. One or two.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, go ahead. Did you have an area direction you were going to take us?
Yes, but no, go ahead. Wrap it up.
Oh, I was just going to say, as far as from other things, like as far as Pixar being, on the decline, I started to just think generally outside of even the movies. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I thought about, too, is they are still the industry leader as far as rendering software that's out there. The RenderMan software is still doing great business for them, and they keep releasing more releases of it. They're making it more accessible to more people all the time. And that is still one of the benchmarks of renderers that are out there. The quality of their movies is still unmatched, in my opinion. They definitely, the thing that's always cool is they keep the current version of RenderMan for themselves, and then they sell the previous version. So they always have the one step up technology that's next, which is something that's kind of cool. I mean, if you're going to develop the software, you might as well utilize it on your films first and test it before you sell it. Mm-hmm. Parks expansions that are going on in the Disney World and Disneyland parks. As well as the group that manages that relationship for managing properties outside of the studio is growing as well within there. And then even the archive.
We should say real quick, Pixar Fest, huge success. Loved it. I love all the new things that they're doing. They make the Cars movies better with that whole Cars Land, the Racing Academy thing coming out. It's all good.
Absolutely. And then the final thing I was going to say there too is just, the archives. So they recently expanded their archives, and they've done some brilliant things to protect their future based on the past work that they've done. So it goes to show that they believe that there is a history there that they want to preserve and continue to move forward as well. So I think that there is a change. It's an evolution. The quality of some of the stories might not have been what it was, but I am extremely excited for what's to come with all these originals, with some of the excitement and energy that's going on in the studio too. So that's where I kind of wanted to just sprinkle in a couple things, not necessarily just film related.
So we're going to read some responses from listeners and fans of the show who answered, is Pixar in decline? Before we do, TJ, okay, best animated feature 2019 Oscars. Who do you think is going to win it? It's going to be between, let's see, Incredibles 2 is up there. There's no Disney animation films, but we do have Smallfoot, which I just saw today.
What was your take on it?
Well, first, let's answer. First, I want to hear what you have to say. So, is there any other animated film? I know I'm missing a couple, actually. There was this Hotel Transylvania. That might get nominated.
Probably Ferdinand.
Ferdinand was December, though.
Okay, all right. Yep.
And it wasn't nominated, I guess, was it? Or maybe it was nominated for 2017. I think there are some Ghibli films that might get nominated, but there aren't any on my radar as of yet. But okay, what's your prediction? Who do you think's going to take it?
Well, I mean, it's going to sound obvious from me, but I do think it will be Incredibles 2. I think it's one of those things that had the popular vote behind it, which they clearly, like we said, talked about at the box office. And although the ratings were not critically as high as some of the previous Pixar films, it still was a lot higher than some of the other competition that they'll have for this year.
Right.
So between box office pull, between the direction and kind of power that Brad Bird has on some of his things, I think that honestly, I think it will be Incredibles 2. But that's, again, it's a biased view, and I'm well aware of that.
Absolutely. Well, I guess I don't see the Academy caring all that much about that new Grinch movie because it's so derivative. Even if it ends up being a delight, I'm not the biggest Illumination fan. People know this. But yeah, I don't know if I see it setting the world on fire. And then also, I do hope, though, that Spider-Man movie, Into the Spider-Verse, I really hope that gets a nomination if it's great, because that animation style really looks cool. It really looks different.
Yeah.
But I have a feeling you're right. Incredibles 2 is probably the front runner. Smallfoot, not the best movie, unfortunately.
Okay. All right.
It was pretty average. Music was just... it wanted to be a musical once in a while, and it really didn't work for me. And the story was a little bit heavy-handed. I liked the message of it, but if you want to hear more what I have to say about Smallfoot, we'll have probably already talked about it by the time you're listening to this on Cinemaholic. So,
fantastic. Okay. Yeah.
That said, here are what some of our fans and listeners have been saying. I sent this question out on Twitter. Thank you, everybody who answered. Not going to be able to get to everyone, but we appreciate everyone who participated. First of all, there's Antonio. So in response to, is Pixar in decline? Antonio said, Pixar isn't in decline. They just face more competition from other studios and release more sequels, but only because that's become the Hollywood norm. I would only say that's always been the Hollywood norm, honestly, or it has been for a long time. Remakes and all that stuff. Once Pixar starts doing remakes, that's when I'm going to be a little, whoa, I don't know about that.
Ooh, I would not be a fan of that. Yeah.
Levi said, my thought is that the studio may have recently found itself in a place of financial rockiness. So we kind of talked about that. This is why it's been producing sequels for the past handful of years, and that some would consider superfluous. Finding Dory, Toy Story 4, etc. It said Toy Story 5, but I think Levi means Toy Story 4 there.
Yeah.
And since these are made from a place of financial motivation and less of a creative one, Pixar is no longer quite the powerhouse it had been previously. We really covered this. My only thing is that I think that I don't know if I would consider all of their sequels superfluous, with maybe the exception of Cars 2. What would you say?
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think that that's the case. Cars 2, again, gets a bad rap. I don't dislike it as much as other folks. But yeah, that one felt the most like let's have some fun instead of let's write something that has more of a purpose.
I really agree with this one. Jay Grandmaster said, financially, definitely not. No one can really argue that. Creatively, right. I would argue no as well. Coco is one of their best films in both an emotional and technical standpoint. I would agree with that. And Incredibles 2 is a better superhero movie than most live action ones. I kind of agree with that. In my top of the year so far, I have Incredibles 2 and Black Panther as my two favorite superhero films of the year. And that's big. I mean, I liked Incredibles 2 quite a bit, more than Infinity War, Ant-Man and the Wasp. Do you agree with that?
I absolutely do. Yeah. I mean, again, biased, but I also think that between action, the edge of my seatness, and just the overall feel of everything, I feel like I was more enthralled with Incredibles 2 than those others.
Interesting. Thor Ragnarok is still my favorite Marvel film, though. So,
cool.
I don't know how I would compare it to Incredibles 2. I think I like it a bit more than that one. Okay, Ryan said, box office wise or creatively? I think we're kind of saying both. It's hard to look at Finding Dory and Incredibles 2's numbers as declines. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
But this is interesting. Ryan says, but they definitely don't muster the feeling of early Pixar. I think you said that. You really touched on that as well. However, they put out two high quality films in the more recent years, Coco and Inside Out. For me, Coco's top 5. One of the reasons for that being the creation of a whole new world that we had never explored previously. Especially you can say Inside Out too. That was a very new world. That sense of adventure is what pulled us in as the movie going audience. We had never seen what toys do when we leave or what's behind our closet door. So I think Ryan is saying that whole idea of the secret life mentality is what what he really gets out of the early Pixar. But I've always been more I like weird Pixar. I like Wall-E and the Good Dinosaur. I like when they do something that's not relying on the what if toys had feelings, what if feelings had feelings, and all that stuff.
Yeah, I kind of see it all different ways, and I view it as just more independently. I mean, Inside Out is one of my top 5 Pixar films. The what if factor is always fun. But I've always said that I think people rank Pixar movies because it became kind of the norm at the beginning as far as how much they make you feel and or cry.
Yeah. And
I think if people walk out of a Pixar movie and they don't have some type of emotion, and there's rare exceptions to this. I think people walked out of Incredibles 2 without having emotion, but they were kind of just high-fiving, being like, yeah, that was great. But I feel like in general, people go into Pixar expecting to have some tears. So I kind of feel like most people walk out expecting that, and that's how they rank it.
Definitely. I think one time I get frustrated when people ask us to rank the Pixar movies. We did a whole thing on Cinemaholics where we ranked them with John Carlin, who weighs in here. And Finding Nemo, still my favorite Pixar film, but instead of ranking them, I like to rank all my favorite Pixar moments and not do it in any sort of order.
Yep.
Because then you could do a list of 50 things and it's more fun.
Absolutely.
Okay. One of the Carlin brothers, Tyler Carlin, I consider him the indie comedy of the Super Carlin brothers. He's my personal favorite.
Yeah.
He said, I think the era of sequels will always be a challenge, but I think Coco is easily some of their best work, even in the realm of sequels. Incredibles 2 is far better than some of its similar competition. Iron Man 2, Age of Ultron, Guardians 2. So kind of echoing what Ryan is saying in terms of Incredibles 2, just really standing up with superhero movies. And I think that's pretty fair.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. Yeah, 100%.
I have a running bet with Tyler Carlin for the Rotten Tomatoes score of Wreck-It Ralph 2. So stay tuned on that. The wager is, I think it's going to be an 83% on Rotten Tomatoes. He thinks it's going to be higher than that. And if I lose or if I win, so the winner gets to force the loser to watch a movie of the other person's choice, and then we have to talk about it on one of our podcasts. Tyler does the Bacon and Eggs podcast with Ethan Edgehill, so I might have to go on their podcast to talk about some lame film I don't want to watch. So that should be fun. We'll see how that turns out.
Absolutely. Yep.
Speaking of Carlins, Jonathan Carlin weighed in as well. He said, or Jay Carlin, of course.
Yes.
I like to call him Jonathan because we have the same name and that's mine. So,
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
But fine. Jay said, I don't think they're on the decline. I just wish they'd focus more on originals rather than sequels. Inside Out and Coco are masterful. Finding Dory, Cars 3, and Incredibles 2 are all fine, but pretty standard sequel material, except Jack Jack. He's gold. And I think that's why, Jay's mentioned this. I've heard him talk about how he's really looking forward to the next 5 films being originals. So we'll get back to him. Maybe he'll have different thoughts later.
You never know. Yeah.
Seamus Gorman, love Seamus, love his YouTube channel. He said, I'm not 100% sure we can say they're on the decline, but it's been a little on and off. Charlie Ridgely from Comic Book said, I wouldn't say it's in a decline at all. The last two Pixar movies have been some of the best the last few years. Coco is probably one of the studio's best two features, period. So kind of getting a lot of the same sentiment. They're like, Coco, if Coco hadn't come out, I have a feeling people would be way more negative on Pixar right now. I think that's fair to say.
1,000,000,000%. And I was going to say, if you took the pulse of this question right after Cars 3 came out, it was a different world. We lived in a different world then. I mean, people were writing in our forum just scathing reviews about Pixar. They're completely done. They've lost their touch. Coco revived the energy, and then people could look back to Inside Out and say, all right, there's maybe enough that I can salvage this company now. So I feel like people are taking more of that cautious approach now and saying, I don't know if it's a decline so much as, and then they come up with a reason. Yeah. Whereas before, right after Cars 3, people were just like out to get them.
This is an interesting one, kind of in relation to that. Corey Woodruff said, in my mind, they're struggling to adapt the new generation of talent. You talked about this a bit. The meeting at the Hidden City Cafe basically mapped out the golden age. That's more of a rumor. We don't know for sure if they
Pete Docter has come in and said that wasn't fully the case. That was more of like folklore. Yeah.
But we've, sometimes they're just trying to hide the truth from us. You never know. And then he said, developing new voices has been the problem to me. But I'm kind of more on your side with this, TJ, where I think they are getting better at that. And I see it. I see where they're bringing in new talent and they're figuring it out. They're adapting.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you want to get some listeners a little agitated there. And this is something that we had heard. So I guess I had heard this through another source. But so don't take it as this was ever official by Pixar. So I can't say it was 100%. But Cars 4 was in the works, and then they scrapped it based on how Cars 3 did at the box office. So so that could have been one of those tides that would turn people the other way, and maybe they'd be singing a different song here if they heard that was really going to be the case.
Yeah. I think that's exactly right. And I think we're all the better off for it. You know what? Talk to me again and maybe in 15 years, I'll be ready for another Cars film, maybe.
Yeah. There you go.
Mark said, no, I don't think it's in decline. The animation is still great. Almost all the films are still starting out at #1 in the box office for the weekend, and Toy Story 4 is sure to continue the trend. We haven't talked a lot about Toy Story 4, but I have a feeling that's the case. I'm not very excited about T4.
Okay.
I'm a little.
That was going to be my question for you. I had another one that I had written down, which is, what are your thoughts on Toy Story 4? Do you think it should have been greenlit?
I don't buy it. I don't buy all of this narrative that they're pushing out. It's like, oh, the story's there. The story's so great. The only reason we're doing this is for the story. If the story was there and if it was so far along, why are they willing to keep Jon Lasseter on until December, despite all the bad press? Because they're that worried about the story not working. That's kind of where I'm at the moment. I've gone back and forth many times. People know, because sometimes I'm a little bit more optimistic, but at the moment, I'm a little bit more negative than I've been in the past. What about you?
Well, I'll also say that Jon Lasseter, he's not just on for Toy Story 4 either. So he's doing some other creative consulting. Yeah. So he is part of that. But with Josh Cooley directing and working on the writing of that film, they definitely have had their issues. I mean, obviously with the whole Rashida Jones and Will McCormack coming in and out, and then the new female writer that they brought in, Stephanie Folsom, I believe. There's definitely changes that have been going on. So there's something that was there. The original through line of, this is a love story based on John and Nancy Lasseter, their love story back in the day, and how Woody and Buzz are going to pair together and go search for Bo Peep. There was some question whether that was going to be the case. We heard the rumors that this was potentially some other type of adventure where they're in an RV going on a road trip.
Which I've heard that's still the case. I mean, I haven't heard anything conflicting that. Have you?
No, I haven't heard anything conflicting it either. But there was, I did hear one moment that said that the whole Bo Peep storyline was scrapped, but then I had also heard that it was redone, that they reevaluated it and said it's staying in. So I guess there's not enough to go on again, with 100% certainty. But there's definitely been. I mean, nobody can say there's not changes to the story and that it has some type of story issue, being as they changed over writers and are keeping John on as far as to also talk about this. So there's some there's some things there, but I'm going to be interested in it. I support my stance, and what we've talked about on our podcast is that I believe in Pixar. I will always go in with an optimistic mind. I might walk out with a different view, but I'm always going to go in saying, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt, saying I think they've got this. I mean, as much as, you even say, The Good Dinosaur was something that was different for you, that one is my least favorite. And I feel like it had some story issues that I wasn't able to get past. Technologically and visually, it was stunning. But, I believe that I'm going to walk in saying I'm ready to see Woody and the gang again. And John Ratzenberger has completed recording his lines. He said it's
Lucky Charms
he said it's
in.
Great. Yeah, Lucky Charms in. He said it's doing great. We still don't know how they're going to handle anything with Potato Head officially, with Don Rickles passing away. And then also Tim Allen has been in the booth and said that it's, he's like, I'm not saying anything to get, my hand slapped, but it's looking great. So I'm going to go in with an optimistic mind. As much as 3 felt like such a beautiful closure, and why would you ever mess with that? I'm going to give it the benefit of the doubt.
All right. I totally there with you. I'm really hoping this is going to be a Coco situation where they bring in, because I remember hearing like Coco was having issues, and then I think it was it Matthew Aldrich that they brought in kind of to like help turn it around, and
I believe it was, yeah.
Yeah, I hope that's the case here. Although the Rashida Jones thing does really worry me, and it is kind of indicative of the Lasseter stuff that we were talking about. So we'll just have to wait and see. Okay, Tyler Daswick. So he's my editor at Relevant Magazine. I was really happy that he got to weigh in here. He said, agreed with most here. I think the temporary pivot to sequels has made for some less canonical movies, but to say they're in decline is like saying the Warriors declined between their back-to-back championships because they won fewer games in the regular season. Not worried. I love that analogy, especially that's great. Yeah, especially having Steph Curry in my backyard. I think that's a good way to look at it. You do have to look at the big picture.
But you'll notice that he also touched on the sequels thing, and several people have done it. And like I said, I don't think it's the sequels. Nobody really cares if the story is great enough. Mm-hmm. It's really more about that transitioning to the next guard, and Ed Catmull touched on it. And I personally think that's what it is. It's that's why they said Newt died. That one that the film that you mentioned was canceled. And it was, we took this group, we put them in a separate place, and we gave them no executive oversight. And we just wanted to see what was going to happen. And looking back, he's like, yeah, that was probably the wrong call. And then they took some of these new people that were like, well, you did a great job in story. Let's go ahead and throw you in the director's chair. I mean, it's like, these are not bad things to do, but I feel like the stories were different enough. I don't think it's the sequels. Because we've seen, like I said, with Finding Dory and Incredibles 2, over $1 billion. Audiences don't hate it.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that's why, like you're saying, we're seeing a lot of the same answers from people because audiences are feeling that. They are kind of getting the same reaction, but it's not quite as negative as I guess what you're saying. Then I think some people are bearing it out. Jeremy is a wonderful, wonderful friend of the pod. He said, definitely not in decline. Inside Out and Coco alone prove that. But I also think it's fair to point out Pixar's recent output doesn't quite measure up to their near-perfect 95 to 2010 run. The focus on sequels is the easy answer, maybe the increase to multiple films a year, too. We touched on that. We kind of said that, I said it. You defended it. And to your credit, I think that, that maybe that is a culprit. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's just a matter of circumstance, and we shouldn't judge the releasing of it, and really it's the movies on their own. It's one to think about.
Well, I will also say the one thing that does do for the studio, though, when you have films that are that close together, is that definitely puts the pinch on resources. So their render farm only has so many hours in a day that it can go. And they have continued to increase the number of computers that are part of that render farm on every film, doubling them almost at some points from film to film. But it puts strain on those resources. So when you start doing that, you potentially have an instance where you could be pinching a film where they're like, well, you know what, that film's going to have to rest because we don't have time to re-render it. I don't know that they would do that. Ed Catmull has always stood behind the phrase of, if you push a film, people will eventually forget that you pushed the date back, but they're never going to forget if you put out a bad film. Mm-hmm. So
that's why I didn't panic when I was like, okay, Toy Story 4, Incredibles 2, the dates are kind of getting moved around. I guess more Incredibles 2. That's great. Good. Do that. If that's what it takes, delay it. I don't care.
Yeah. So as much as I defended it, I also do have a little bit from a resource standpoint, too, that it's kind of like internally, how does that all going to work?
Right. Josh has a very interesting take on this. He says, well, will Pixar still create masterpieces from here on out? Probably. So that's good. That's a good point. I mean, we can basically expect more great Pixar films. Why would we say it's declining? But whatever magic Pixar had, and maybe that was Lasseter, as problematic as that now is almost certainly gone. So that's kind of a bold take. Josh seems to think that the magic isn't there anymore. He says, you look at what Lasseter did when he took over Disney Animation and the instant improvement there, and you get the sense he maybe was a once-in-a-generation talent. I completely disagree, though. I think that Josh is great. He's a fellow writer at Relevant. Josh is great, but I think he's discounting Pete Docter here, and I think he's discounting, Lee Unkrich, and we kind of already touched on it. But yeah, I think that it's hard to look at Lasseter a little bit too much on this and give him all of the credit. There are many, many wonderful minds at Pixar, and some of the recent films alone definitely prove that.
Well, let's also talk about it from the standpoint of, we mentioned the sports reference, and I kind of touched on bands. But I mean, look at how bands produce albums. And a lot of times you find that fans, because we're big music fans, on our side as well. And a lot of times people say their first or second album is always a band's first one because they had a struggle and they were going for this. I mean, there's something to the magic of they had to find and scrape for every last thing they had. Right. And then for a period there, especially again after the Disney sale, where employees had some bad emotions about it, but all of a sudden they got an influx of cash and investment as well. So maybe they didn't have to struggle as much. Maybe things came and they didn't have that scrappiness that they had before. Talent was knocking on their door now instead of having to go find the talent. So there's something to be said for that too. And so maybe some of that magic did change, but like we talked about, the people that are coming in next, the next guard that are coming up with, I believe Pete Docter is going to be a gigantic shot in the arm as the chief creative officer for the studio. I think he is going to lead them to the next magical phase. Yeah,
we've both met Pete Docter multiple times, I think.
Yep.
I think, every time I talk to this guy or every time I hear him speak, I always get that sense of like, this guy's a leader. This guy has a vision and he just has discernment, Like I remember when we were watching some of the dailies for some of the recent movies he's worked on, and just the way that he directs, the way that he is always pushing for the work to be better, that is a very specific quality that I don't always see in all of the Pixar directors, like different reels that I've seen, and that to me is the difference, or that to me is like kind of what makes him stand out a little bit. So I couldn't be more excited to see what he can do, especially because I consider him genuinely like just a decent person, and I think that that's going to do well to make people feel like Pixar is a great place to work. Not that it stopped being that, but I think it did for some, maybe a bunch of people.
It definitely had some issues, and I think that you're right. Having somebody that has as high of moral standards and is just a darn good person. I mean, if you think about it, when we got to sit with him at Inside Out, for every press event that I've been at Pixar, none have been as personal as that one, where literally I was knee to knee and I think you were right to my left, or maybe two down on my left. But I just, there's never been a setting that was that personal. And them wanting to, nobody's ever gone around and said, what site are you guys from? Nobody did the introductions like that. He's a special person that makes you feel very open. Like you can open up to him right away. And I think that works well in his direction style, like you pointed out. But I think in general, he also has just that weird feeling, and not just because of the films that he's made. Certain people just have a magnetism about them, and he has that. At least to me, from being around him and from hearing what other people say. I mean, we've heard countless employees that are like, I'll do whatever it takes to work on another Pete Docter film.
Yeah, I think 100% agree with that. Every word. I think that really is like when they announced that it was Pete Docter. On the one hand, I was a little cynical. I was like, well, of course they are. He's the one who elevated Domichi. They want this to look as good as possible. But at the same time, I was like, yeah, but who else deserves it as much as he does? I would argue a few people, but it does feel right. It feels like he's the right person to take over. So that's my main reason where I'm like, maybe Pixar is declining, but it definitely hasn't seen its best days already. I don't think that's fair to say. I think that Pixar and Disney could once again, like, have a run. Maybe it'll be even better. So that's what I'm hoping for. I'm seeing evidence of it. And because me, I love the weird. And I think that Pixar brings on the weird more often than they don't. And, unfortunately, we don't have time to talk about The Good Dinosaur because that would be a fascinating conversation, I'm sure. But okay, before we wrap up here, I do want to know, so you talked to Julie about doing this. I want to know, what does she think? Where is she at?
As far as from the decline standpoint?
Yeah.
She is, so I kind of meshed some of her comments in with mine. She's on the same page as far as that.
The happiest couple on earth. They just do everything together.
Well, we do everything together, and awesome. to be fully honest, yes, we met while working together, and we've always wanted to work together again, which is one of the motivations why we started our site as well.
That's awesome.
Because we just have this. Once we get going together, the creative energy continues to spin. She grounds me even more in terms of optimism because I tend to lean more pessimistic than she does, and she is the eternal optimist. So she wouldn't have anything necessarily negative to say. She looks at the greatness of it at all. But in all honesty, our opinions are somewhat biased because of how much we know about the making that goes into it. We respect art in general so much that also weighs into what we believe in these films, because I know the sweat that went into them. So when you know how the sauce was made, it tastes a little better because you know some of the passion and the sweat and those tears that went into it in the late nights and everything. But she's even more optimistic than I am about the future, and it's not to say that I'm not. She's even further, though.
I get so frustrated when people kind of just dismiss like the work that goes into these films, or they dismiss the fans, and they kind of look at it as like, you really love these films that are just whatever. And I'm like, no, like if you're a fan of Pixar films and you spend a lot of time learning about them, researching them, figuring out how they're made, you just respect the craft more and more. It inspires you to make your own stories, maybe even your own movies. And that's kind of why it's like when you become a fan, it really feels like you're part of something. And so I hate it when I kind of see this mentality of like, well, what's so great about Pixar? And it's like, you must not know much about Pixar then, because they really are something special. And that's why we could spend all of this time talking about Pixar movies in such a fun format. I think this was a blast, TJ. We got to run. That'll do it for this week's happy hour. But I can't thank you enough for coming on, sharing some of your incredible wisdom, pun intended, on all things Pixar. Before we go,
anytime.
Yes.
Yeah, I was just going to say anytime. We love talking about Pixar. Like I said, I can talk about it all day.
Well, next time we're gonna have to bring Julie on because I got a lot of questions.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Please remind our listeners where and how they can plug into Pixar Post and all the work that you're doing right now.
Yeah, so probably the best way is just heading straight to pixarpost.com.
Makes sense.
From there, yeah, exactly. From there, you can reach any of our social media channels. Twitter and Instagram, Facebook are our most active. And then our podcast, any of that, they can all be linked to right from the homepage. We have a podcast button, and then all the socials, we have the buttons right on the side there. But it's if you want to get specific down into the nitty gritty of Pixar and how they make their films, this would be one of the places to go out there. I mean, obviously, you guys dive into these topics and talk about them as well, and so we'll continue to listen in on and to you guys as well, because if you're a fan of art, like you mentioned, you're a fan of many forms of art, and we love hearing about other film as well. Yeah, but if you're looking for a Pixar masterclass, this is where to go. We're going to be linking to pixarpost.com in the show notes of this episode, so go check that out if for whatever reason, right from your phone. Well, again, that'll do it. Thanks again, TJ, and hopefully we'll see you next time. Absolutely. Thanks so much, John.